So obviously today we're going to talk about Marxism and religion. Um, we've already kind of started, but I had a little bit of a hard time trying to figure out like how to approach this because there's so many things that you can talk about. So I'm going to just kind of do like a general overview, kind of like very frameworky and base bones-y. And then sort of just talk about the Marxist view on religion as a whole, the way that personal religious beliefs can be weaponized against the working class. And then finally, like how we should approach the religious sector of the working class as communists and as organizers. Capitalism has created a world of alienation, oppression, exploitation, and just tons of people wanting to be free. The role of religion in the creation of the world is really messy and contradictory. So this will only be kind of an overview, and hopefully we can get into more specific, like direct issues throughout this discussion. Also, just want to throw out that this is like my area of sort of expertise. I do have a master's degree in religious studies, so it is going to be a little bit academic at the beginning because I can't turn that part of my brain off. So sorry. So going to start with definitions. It's really hard to define religion because everyone kind of gets like the vibe of what religion is. But once you start trying to define it or like put it into a box, you end up leaving ones out and it just kind of gets messy. So this is kind of the definition that I tend to work with, which is religion as a social cultural system of designated behaviors and practices, morals, beliefs, worldviews that relates humanity to a supernatural, transcendental, or spiritual element. Throughout the world, there's an estimated 10,000 distinct religions. So I'm going to further categorize them into three main groups, which is again kind of the academic way that it's done, which is world religions, indigenous beliefs, and new religious movements. So the first category is indigenous beliefs. This category of religion includes a wide range of belief systems across the entire globe. What groups them into one category is the fact that they are usually localized and small, and they do not engage in evangelism or missionary work. They're typically beliefs that are also intertwined with the traditional lifestyles of the region and are transmitted orally, so usually no written text. For example, in Hawaii, where I was born and raised, the indigenous belief reveres the national elements as godlike figures, which is expressed in the way that the land and natural world is cared for. Stories, beliefs, and practices are passed on through songs, chants, and hula dance to future generations. On this slide, we see Pele, the goddess of fire, who is still worshipped today as a shaper of the land and is a prominent figure in Hawaiian mythology. Indigenous religions are also sometimes called ethnic religions for the reason because they're in a small area, and so they tend to be very in-group. Although they're technically kind of an insular belief, and again, like I said, localized, they're still often drawn upon for social change in the same way that we see a lot of larger world religions being used to influence society. To stay with the example of Hawaii, the protests that recently broke out surrounding building a large telescope on a sacred mountain against the will of the native people drew heavily on Hawaiian mythology and ancestry chants that tie the Hawaiian people to the land and the gods. We also see this a lot with like oil pipeline resistance and native communities in North America. The second category is new religious movements. They're sometimes referred to as cults. They're my favorite subsect of religion. They're so fun. We'll go with fun. They're typically groups that have sort of modern origins and exist on the edges or are completely removed from mainstream religion. They can sometimes be offshoots of a more established religion. For example, like the Mormon Church is an offshoot of Protestant Christianity, or ISKCON, known as the Hare Krishnas, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. They draw upon Hindu beliefs, even though they consider themselves their own thing. Or they can be completely new religions, such as UFO religions like Heaven's Gate and Scientology, everyone's favorite, or other sort of new age religions like Nexium, which was another one that's kind of been in the news lately. Also, kind of another way that these are categorized is if these groups exist in high tension with the rest of society. So the example that's usually used for this is like the Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church. When they first started, they were in really, really high tension with society. Obviously, they had like this whole polygamous thing going on. It was a little bit yuck. And as they grew and grew, they became more mainstream to the point of like Mitt Romney running for president as a Mormon, which I'm sure Brigham Young would have never have imagined. The final group is world religions, which is a category that kind of puts together like the big five, which is Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. There's also some smaller groups that get put in here that have like large global populations like Sikhism. But typically it's those big five. So for the purposes of this discussion, we'll classify this group of religions as religions that are mainstream, have a global community, so they therefore interact with capitalism the most, which is what's most important and exciting to us. And they sort of, the ones that we will probably focus on in this discussion are the monotheistic Abrahamic religions that all sort of trace their path back to the biblical figure of Abraham. All right, so finally, last little thing is sort of an overview of the religious landscape right now. If we're talking about the international working class, so many of them are religious believers. And so it's really important to kind of understand what's going on. These stats are all from Pew Research Center, which does a lot of like global and specific to America research on religion and other stuff too. As you can see, the religion is quickly declining. I think right now, Christians make up about 63% of the US population, whereas a decade ago it was 75%. So that's a pretty big drop. There's a huge decline in belief in general amongst Americans. However, the majority of Americans still believe that religion is important and do have some sort of practice that impacts their daily life. Globally, it's hard because, like I said, there's so much differentiation in what people consider to be religion and what isn't. But some reports from Pew indicate that about 62% of people internationally say that religion plays an important role in their lives, especially when it comes to morality, what's right and wrong. This varies widely, obviously, on region, which we can see in this like little map guy, and also on economic factors, with sort of the more well-established European nations being more atheist leaning and emerging nations being more religious and faithful, which has very clear reasons that we will talk about in a sec. I want to get this tattooed on me. It looks so cool. Sorry, I'll need some water. All right, so religions have histories that are complex and doctrines that are contradictory and open to interpretations. Believers have to pick and choose what to follow in order to be relevant to their own lives. That's why it's often possible to use religion to justify almost any course of action throughout history, whether it be progressive or conservative. Much of the organizing of the civil rights movement in the United States in the 50s and 60s was done in Black churches, demonstrating the potential for religious people to use their personal beliefs to progress society towards a more inclusive and egalitarian culture. We've also discussed in recent weeks the Iranian Revolution, where Muslim communists fought hard to combine their religion and politics in order to advance the struggle for freedom in Iran. Of course, without a strong political mass movement to go alongside these efforts, they were easily appropriated by the ruling class and eventually put down. In these cases, religion and religious beliefs can simultaneously be used for progressive as well as conservative arguments on the exact same issue. The most common example of this is the fact that the Bible could and would be used to both condemn and support slavery. Because of the contradictions inherent in these traditions, religion can be interpreted and reinterpreted to serve the interests of particular specific groups. So this is definitely something that we have to keep in mind. Of course, when the majority of the international population states that religion and their religious beliefs is important to them in their daily lives, we can't just ignore that. It's certainly not ignored by our class enemies, the ruling class, who routinely weaponize religion and prey upon people's beliefs in order to further advance capitalism and their hold on us. The only way that we're going to smash capitalism is by uniting and organizing the working class to take back our power from the ruling class. And in order to do that, the issue of religion and religious belief will need to be addressed. Divisions on this matter are not permanent. They can always be overcome, even when they're around really specific, deep beliefs. So now that we have kind of like a little framework, we can turn to the role that religion plays in humanity. It's clearly a force that shapes our lives, thoughts, and actions for billions of people throughout the world. It's also important to point out the difference between one's own personal religious beliefs and practices and the institutions of religion, such as the Catholic Church, who are like the arms of capitalist ruling class and have committed so much violence against the proletariat throughout time. So I'll do my best to continue making the distinction between personal beliefs and the way that the capitalist class can weaponize those beliefs. It can't be denied that a large swath of the working class does hold some kind of belief through which they filter information about the world. Therefore, in order to address the issue of religion, we first have to understand the role that it plays under capitalism. So we can't go much further without the quote. So we'll start with Marx, a very good place to start, and his extremely famous and often cut short quote, which I will go into more depth about after. But he says, religious suffering is at one and the same time the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. The abolition of religion as the illusionary happiness of the people is the demand for their real happiness. To call on them to give up their illusions about their conditions is to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusions. Also another cool picture. So from this quote, the conclusion that's often drawn is that religion is bad and Marx doesn't like religion, so we should stop being religious. However, if you look at the full quote, it sums up the roots of religious thinking, its role in soothing the conditions of suffering, and then prescribes the material basis for overcoming those conditions. By using the analogy of a pain reliever, Marx is pointing out that living under capitalism is super shitty and painful, and sometimes we need a buffer to ease the difficult conditions of life. In the second half of his quote, Marx is asserting that demanding that we just abolish religion is not based in material reality. If we as Marxists agree that religion can be a comfort for those suffering under capitalism, abolishing religion outright would leave a large portion of the working class to face the horrors of this system alone. Rather, we should be focusing on ridding the world of the root causes of religion, which are the underlying material conditions that lead people to seek out comfort. In this way, Marx is seeing religion as a symptom, not the disease itself. Once the root cause of suffering has been eradicated, religion should naturally die out because people would be getting their needs met. On the other side of the painkiller analogy, opium is also something that dulls the senses and induces relaxation, which Marx believed was one way that religion could be weaponized by the ruling class. For example, one of the biggest theoretical questions that religion seeks to answer is what happens when we die? The promise of an afterlife gives people something to look forward to. You can put up with kind of a lot in your everyday life if you have eternal bliss waiting for you in death. Along those lines, religious doctrine often makes a virtue of being exploited by idolizing those who endure oppression and suffering as righteous and therefore more godly. The Bible famously states, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Scriptures like this kind of emphasize that if you're poor and you're suffering, that's actually good. It's good, actually, because you're going to get closer to heaven. Obviously, this is an important way for the church to instill in believers that being poor is good while they accumulate wealth at the top. This further reinforces social order and class division, offering hope of a supernatural intervention to solve problems on earth rather than encouraging the population to improve their own material conditions. Therefore, one of the ways that religion is weaponized by the ruling class is to prevent people from making demands for social change by dulling the pain of oppression and promising a blissful afterlife. So religion not only reflects the problem of material deprivation, but it also addresses the issue of human alienation. A study cited in one of the readings for tonight asked both conservative and progressive Christians what they felt a world without religion would look like. And for both groups, life without their religious belief was seen to be entailing fear, sadness, isolation, and a loss of meaning or hope. These feelings are all symptoms that we, of course, see from living under capitalism. Someone might have their material needs met, but still be prevented from forming meaningful relationships with others due to the way that our society is structured. As Marxists, we should understand that religion offers compassion and a yearning for a better world. If religion is a painkiller fighting against material and emotional deprivation, we can understand that life under the system can drive people to seek comforts of religion as easily as we seek any other vice to get us through the day. Religion is only necessary under exploitative systems where the majority of people do not control the means of their production and are forced to sell their labor. Marxist theory about this is further proven or at least supported by the fact that if there should be evidence that when these needs are met, religious belief goes down. We do see that in a lot of these sort of social democratic European countries where they have a stronger safety net and have a lower religious belief. This is a large quote, but I will read it. So in practice, atheism does seem to be like the communist thing, but we do have new, or not new, but fun atheists that I'm kind of calling, like I said, like these Reddit sort of edgelord atheists who treat religious people with disdain and look down on them as ignorant and backwards people to be enlightened by bourgeois thinkers like themselves. They look around at the problems caused by capitalism and do their best to blame them on religion and religious belief. However, as communists, we need to look at these forces and determine whether they advance or work against class struggle. A dialectical materialist is not someone who just fights against religion in the abstract or just by trying to disprove theoretical propositions, but instead we should be combating religion on the basis of actual class struggle. This is a quote from Lenin that is pretty fire as usual, that kind of talks about this. But under no circumstances ought we fall into the error of posing the religious question in abstract idealistic fashion as an intellectual question unconnected with class struggle, as is not infrequently done by the radical Democrats from among the bourgeois. It would be so stupid to think that in a society based on the endless oppression and coarsening of the worker masses, religious prejudice could be dispelled purely by propaganda methods. It would be bourgeoisie narrow-mindedness to forget the yoke of religion that weighs upon mankind is merely a product and reflection of the economic yoke within society. No number of pamphlets and no amount of preaching can enlighten the proletariat if it is not enlightened by its own struggle against the dark forces of capitalism. Unity in this really revolutionary struggle of the oppressed class for the creation of paradise on earth is more important to us than unity of proletarian opinion on paradise in heaven. So what he's trying to say is we can't just institute socialism from convincing people that socialism is going to work top down. We have to instead be meeting people where they are and not just being like, you know, prove that Jesus was real or whatever. So although religion can often be described as the heart of a heartless world and a bomb to soothe the horrors of living under capitalism, it is concurrently a driving force for the advancement of capitalism and is weaponized against the working class, not only in this country, but across the globe through interference in politics all the way down to missionary work. To quote Rosa, and I did find a Rosa cat picture, which is a common goal that I have. The socialist movement in no way fights against religious beliefs. On the contrary, it demands complete freedom of conscience for every individual and the widest possible toleration for every faith and every opinion. But from the moment when priests use the pulpit as a means of political struggle against the working class, the workers must fight against the enemies of their rights and their liberation. For he who defends the exploiters and who helps to prolong this present regime of misery, he is the mortal enemy of the proletariat, whether he be in a cassock or the uniform of the police. So religious institutions pour tons of their resources into reactionary right-wing politics, not just here, but around the globe as well. We see this in India with the rise of Modi and his reactionary Hindu fascist regime in India, which weaponizes Hinduism and Hindu identity to stoke anti-Muslim sentiments. In this slide, you see some protesters who are out taking a stand against new citizenship laws enacted by the Modi regime, which was basically going to not allow Muslims to be citizens of India, which has the second largest Muslim population in the world. The ruling class also uses religion as a smokescreen For example, as we see the religious issue being presented in Palestine, if one believes the dominant rhetoric about the Israel-Palestine conflict, which is the rhetoric, by the way, that I was taught in grad school, which is that it is solely a religious conflict. By doing that, the underlying truth of colonization and imperialism gets lost. In this and many other cases, religion acts as a smokescreen, hiding the fundamental divide between oppressor and oppressed. Furthermore, Israel doesn't oppress the Palestinians in isolation from its allies and the interests of capitalism. In this example, taking a stand against imperialism rather than positioning religion as the enemy actually allows us to think of solutions and address the systemic issue that's really going on. Another way that religion is used for imperialism is through missionary work. It's a little bit of a story time. But again, growing up in Hawaii, I always tell the story, which is true, that I didn't know until college that Mormons was like the Mormon church was a largely white church, because every single Mormon that I knew, and I knew a lot of Mormons, were all Polynesian. They were all Hawaiian. They had all been converted by like this really extensive missionary work that the Mormon church does. And as a result of that huge community, that huge population of Native Hawaiian and Polynesian people had very conservative politics, because the Mormon church clearly is aligned with conservative politicians. So another example from Hawaii of how religion can be weaponized through imperialism, which you can learn more about in another presentation that I gave, which is on YouTube. But armed Christian missionaries were actually the ones that overthrew the Hawaiian kingdom without permission or consent of the United States government. But the government just took advantage of that and was like, oh, cool, we'll take them as a state. But that entire imperialist colonial project was spearheaded by Christian missionaries. In the modern capitalist countries, as we've seen, the roots of religion are to be found in the socially downtrodden condition of the working class and their apparent helplessness in the face of capitalism, which, according to Lenin, every day and every hour inflicts upon ordinary working people the most horrible suffering and the most savage torment, 1,000 times more severe than those inflicted by extraordinary events such as wars, earthquakes, etc. It is the duty of Marxists to put class struggle above all else, not to deepen the divide between religious people and atheists, which only benefits the ruling class by creating a superficial divide amongst the working class. As Lenin said, and I'm sorry quoting Lenin so much, but he's so good, an anarchist who preached war against God at all costs would in effect be helping the priest and the ruling class, as the anarchists always help the bourgeoisie in practice. Engels also condemned the efforts of people who tried to be more revolutionary by introducing atheism as an explicit program into the Workers' Party. He believed that only through class struggle of the working masses could we really free the oppressed from the yoke of religion, not by just outright declaring religion as the enemy. The struggle to achieve the maximum amount of freedom for humankind is the same struggle that will make religion unnecessary, which is why as communists, we do not need to confront religion in any other realm but in class struggle. Where religion and religious workers stand in the way of class struggle, we should combat them as enemies of the progress of working class. However, where religion and religious workers join us in struggle, we should welcome them and work alongside them in order to fight our way towards communism. Yay. Okay, the end.